Let's talk strength training for jiu-jitsu. There are always two camps within this debate. People who swear by not doing any strength training and only doing jiu-jitsu, and others who place strength as the pinnacle for jiu-jitsu performance. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to break down everything to do with strength training for jiu-jitsu and how you can implement it into your training routine so you can maximize your performance on the mats. So the first question we must ask ourselves is, what are we trying to achieve when we're performing strength training for jiu-jitsu? Now, one of the first things we're looking at is the reduction in injury risk. So there's some good research showing that stronger athletes are typically more resilient and less likely to get injured. Plus, they're able to handle heavier workloads. So they're able to train more often and train harder. So both of those things are important. If you're trying to get better at jiu-jitsu, you want to spend more time on the mats. And to do that, you need to make sure that you don't have injuries keeping you off the mats and you're able to handle being on the mats more often and doing more hard sessions. Secondly, we're looking at more at the performance side. Obviously, the stronger you are, you're able to finish and maintain certain positions easier. Obviously, having a strength advantage over an opponent is an advantage in jiu-jitsu. We see now the rampant steroid use within jiu-jitsu at the higher levels, and we see physiques that would probably do well on many bodybuilding stages there. So it's no secret that having the strength is somewhat of an advantage. Obviously, you need to have the technical skill, but having the technical skill with the strength to back it is something to strive for. Now, if we look at some of the research within wrestling and jiu-jitsu regarding strength, we see that strength actually differentiates between elite and sub-elite wrestlers. So the highest level wrestlers are typically stronger in dynamic movement. So just think, for example, bench press squat, and isometric strength. So think, for example, holding something or squeezing. And then when we look at the research in jiu-jitsu in particular, we see that jiu-jitsu athletes are typically stronger than MMA athletes and strikers. Now, this makes sense because within the sport of grappling, you are having to manipulate other human beings, whereas strikers, most of the strength is used throwing limbs, which are much lighter than another human being. Whether this jiu-jitsu strength is because they spend more time in the weight room or because the sport itself develops the strength is up for debate. But regardless, it just shows that jiu-jitsu has a higher strength requirement than these other combat sports. So this is a visual representation of how I see jiu-jitsu and grappling fitting within a strength spectrum over different combat sports. So here we have strength on this side, velocity or speed on this side. For me, grappling jiu-jitsu fits more on the strength side of the spectrum within training, striking more on the speed velocity side, and MMA fits somewhere in between. So within our programming, we're probably going to lean more towards the maximal strength, bodybuilding style, hypertrophy style training that will benefit jiu-jitsu. Now, that doesn't mean you don't perform any kind of speed or velocity type training. A common mistake is doing a simple program like starting strength or 5x5 and only touching on the strength side of physical training. Problem is that we want to start to address the things that we don't get within jiu-jitsu training to help build that resilience and to help reduce that risk of injury, but to also improve performance in other areas. Now, when we're looking at strength testing for a sport like jiu-jitsu, there isn't too much that we can do to influence programming like we could do with, for example, boxing. If you go back to that boxing strength training video, there are a few tests there that can directly influence your programming to improve performance. Within jiu-jitsu, because it's so strength-based, a typical 1RM test might just be enough. For example, knowing your 1RM in the squat or even the bench press, anything like that, a lower and upper body movement can provide enough information for you to go forward. But if you wanted to take it to another level and you wanted to maximize power development or just see where you sit in terms of your optimal versus current force velocity profile test can be a way to do that. It's simply doing squat jumps at 4 or 5 incremental loads and using the My Jump 2 app. It's all explained in there, and I've explained that in a previous video as well. But just quickly, essentially what it will do is going to give you your current slope of force and velocity, and then it's going to give you your optimal slope and force and velocity. And essentially, if you can get your current slope as close as possible to your optimal slope, you're going to maximize power output. Now, it's important to know that within jiu-jitsu, you may want to be a little more force biased within your profile, so you may lean that way anyway. But if you're further away from competition, you may want to try even that up, and may want to maximize power development, especially if you are a wrestling-based or top game-based jiu-jitsu player versus potentially a guard player. Obviously, with the way jiu-jitsu and grappling is trending at the moment, wrestling is becoming more important within the game of jiu-jitsu, especially within submission grappling. A lot of super fight tournaments showing up in various no-gi competitions. Before going to the examples and how you can plan your strength training, we need to understand what we're trying to do with our strength training program. The first thing is addressing what we don't get in training. I've touched on this previously in this video, but essentially we want to cover things or qualities that we don't get when we're on the mat. So within jiu-jitsu, we're probably going to get some kind of strength stimulus, especially if we're doing some kind of wrestling. But what we don't get is a lot of fast reactive bouncing. So for example, plyometric exercise, we may not get the higher end of the maximal strength spectrum. Further, we may not get the higher velocity movements such as jumps. So within our training program, it's good to just touch on those just to keep them fresh. Further, you don't want to lose those abilities, especially if you are a wrestling style jiu-jitsu player, which comes down to our accommodating our jiu-jitsu style within the program. So the great thing about jiu-jitsu is all ages, all fitness levels participate. And if you are an older jiu-jitsu athlete, maybe you're looking to compete in masters, or maybe you're just looking to hit open mats and not have problems. In this case, your jiu-jitsu style may be a little slower. You may play more off your back, or you may play a slower constricting style game. In that case, your strength training may lean more towards that maximal strength style, bodybuilding style training, because one, it plays into your strength, and two, you don't need to add all that extra stress from doing a bunch of high impact jumps and plyometrics. However, it's still important to include a little bit of that within your program, just not to the point where you're doing so much that it's negatively affecting your performance. Now, for the rest of you who may be playing a more explosive style game, or more wrestling style, especially with, as I mentioned, the way jiu-jitsu and grappling is going, then you may need to implement more power style training within your program. And that stuff is the stuff you don't get on the mats with typical jiu-jitsu practice. And that may be things like jumps, throws, plyometrics, and then more explosive lifts. I really enjoy weightlifting derivatives or Olympic weightlifting movements like the power clean, power snatch, and some other ones that I'll be addressing on this channel as well. Those things are great for manipulating other humans because you need to be able to lift relatively heavy people at speed. So let's dive into some examples of programs. So here's an example that covers the entire force velocity spectrum of training for jiu-jitsu. Now, this is just one example of doing it, and obviously this will change depending on how much you work, your background in training, etc., etc. But this kind of covers the broad range for most people, so you can kind of implement this and change it as you need. The most important thing is that you'll be changing the intensity and volume of the exercises depending on what you need. So just a quick overview. The structure of this over the 2 days, you start with a fast movement, plyometric, or a jumping exercise. This will be done with body weight. So this could be things like reactive pogos on the ground. The jumps could be a box jump, etc. You kind of choose between there. You might do a plyometric on day 1 and a jump on day 2. Then you move into your heavier power exercise. This could be a loaded jump. It could be a kettlebell swing. If you know how to do the Olympic lifts, it could be one of the Olympic lift variations as well. It could even be a heavy throw with a medicine ball. So like a medicine ball scoop toss. All these things are great to transfer over to your stand-up jiu-jitsu game, especially if you're wrestling based. Having that ability to take a weight from the knees or from the floor up into your shoulders or over your head, it's a good skill to have. Then we go into our heavy strength training movements. Day 1, it could be a heavy lower body, squat, deadlift, whatever you want to do. On day 2, it might be your heavy upper body stuff. But after that, we go into more of our accessory style stuff, so an upper push pull. Here we've got our single leg exercises, and then we finish with a carry. Again, strongman style exercises and carries, perfect for jiu-jitsu. I really like the sandbag bear hug carry or the sandbag loading. They're kind of similar to our Olympic lifts and jumps here, but with a heavier movement and not becoming ballistic. Now, when we're talking sets and reps, we don't need to do a whole lot of volume within these programs to get results. Now, if your main goal is to build muscle mass, that's a completely different story, and the program changes within that, and that might be another video. I've also got a video on the channel showing a simple routine that you can use for that too. But that program is a different program compared to a performance style program, so bear that in mind. But when we're talking sets and reps, depending, if you want to develop or focus on strength development, you might only do 2 to 3 sets of our plyo jump style training. You might do two or three sets of this heavy power exercise. Then you might do 3 or 4 sets of your heavy lower body or your heavy upper body exercises. And you start to do a little more volume of that versus what you're doing here. Same thing with your accessory stuff. You still, again, might do 3 or 4 sets of these exercises, and then you might carry 2 or 3 sets. Now, on the flip side, if you wanted to get faster, more explosive, you might do 3 or 4 sets up here with your plyo jumps. You might do 3 or 4 sets of your heavier power exercises. And then when you get down to your strength style exercises, you might only do 2 or 3 sets. Then same thing with your carry, you might even only do 1 set. And this is just the idea of manipulating your program based on your goals. The program can be exactly the same as someone else, but you want to be able to change your sets and reps just to emphasize whatever it is you want to do or want to develop within your training. So I wanted to give you some examples for someone who doesn't have much time to train as maybe a little more advanced, from the intermediate to advanced side of their strength training. Now, abbreviated routines comes from the old-time physical culturists. This was before the steroid era, when there were brutally strong men lifting weights on minimal style training programs. Now, if you're interested in more of this stuff, I recommend Dinosaur Training by Brooks Kubik, or anything by Brooks Kubik. He covers a lot of this. And I typically use abbreviated training routines, again, when I'm short on time as well. I love doing them because you just hit the big rocks. And I'm not talking big rocks in powerlifting like squat and bench, deadlift, or whatever. That's boring as shit. I want to be able to do things that I enjoy to do and also cover the entire body and potentially further over that force velocity spectrum. So here's a couple of examples, what I really like to do. Power clean plus push press, so a little bit of a weightlifting complex. Here I might do 3 or 4 sets of 2+2, or I might just work up to a heavy 2+2 or 2+1, meaning I do 2 power cleans, then 1 or 2 push presses. Finish that with a sandbag carry or sandbag loading. That's a full body session right there. Here's another one that's a little less complex in terms of equipment, in terms of technical ability. Front squat, you might work up to a heavy 3, or you might do 2 to 3 sets of 2 to 3 even. And then you might move on to a chin up or a weighted chin up. And again, 4 sets of 5 to 6, done, and that's your session sorted. And these are the things you can do more often too, because they're not going to beat you up the same way that a high volume program would. So if you wanted to train more often in the gym, for whatever reason that is, you can do something like this, and you can manipulate the volume and intensity as you need. So you might do front squat and chin up one day, another day you might do some kind of deadlift, and you might do close grip bench or overhead press, something like that. If you enjoy doing the weightlifting derivatives, you might do power clean, push press one day. Another day might be overhead stuff, might be push press, power jerk. You could even do some kind of power snatch. Opportunities are endless there within your abbreviated training routines. You can even do one lift a day. That's another option that old-time strongmen use. You could even just squat that day, or you could just overhead press. And these things you can do to get 20, 30 minutes, you can get your session done. Now, another option you can do if you wanted to create an abbreviated routine that's not as abbreviated, and you wanted to maybe add a little more volume that's not going to hinder a lot of your jiu-jitsu training or other gym training, is you can finish after these sessions with just body weight exercises. One way I like to program this is you take a push and pull, for example, a push-up in inverted row or a dip and a chin-up, and you just set a rep goal. So for example, 50 push-ups and 50 inverted rows. And what you want to do is you want to superset back and forth, and you want to get to 50 reps total with the least number of sets possible. So for example, you do push-ups, and you end up doing 15 for the first set, you go straight over to the inverted row, you end up doing 10, you go back to the push-up, and you just keep adding your reps until you get to 50. That's a very easy way of getting volume in. It's fast, plus it's not as stressful on the body when you do that, and it can help add some size to your upper body. So that's what I have for you for Jiu-Jitsu strength training. If you want to know how to schedule the strength training within your training week, I created an entire video on that previously, and you can find that under Jiu-Jitsu training schedules. I did that schedule based on a midday class, but you can manipulate it for an evening class, and I will do a video on that as well. But if you like this, please like, subscribe, check the description. There's a link to the Sweet Science of Fighting Underground. It's our members only community on Discord. We also have you get access to all the training programs, including Dominate the Mats Jiu-Jitsu program, as well as the online courses within there. You also get to join the podcast live now, and you can ask questions within the podcast through the members only Q&A.